Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about one of my favorite franchises, Etrian Odyssey. So let's begin. As little preamble, Etrian Odyssey saw the light for first time back in 2007, with similar ideas like in Wizardry games. And while plenty of people know about it nowadays, back in the day it didn't sell that many games, as Atlus was kinda bad announcing them. However, as time passed, it became a bit more popular, or at least I know that plenty of people got into DRPGs because of these entries, especially somewhere around 2015, where multiple companies started developing DRPGs. That goes for Experience, Idea Factory, Atlus, among others. Now, the following isn't to scare people or anything like that, but to keep expectations in check if you truly want to get into these games. And the truth is that they offer a quite raw experience, as they do not have that much in terms of story. You play an Etrian Odyssey game because you want to conquer some quite complicated dungeons while barely holding your team alive. On that front, the very first titles I could recommend are the 3DS remakes, The Millennium Girl and Fafnir Night. The main reason is because JRPGs tend to share amazing stories, but Etrian Odyssey lacks those general ideas, sometimes being but pure text and random events where you are asked things like, there is a monster, do you want to pursue it? Or, there is a lake, do you like to take a sip of its water? With that in mind, The Millennium Girl and Fafnir Night share defined stories, with characters and scenes, plus these games have rebalanced difficulties, rearranged soundtrack, 3D models, and other details like that. So if you have never tried an Etrian Odyssey and you're curious about them, those are the best starting points. Later, I want to talk once again about the stories or lore, but it's better if I check other details prior to that. And it is important to talk about the general flow of the game before sharing the order in which I recommend to play them. Something to keep in mind is that these games explain little to nothing to the player. In other words, I recommend to check in detail each class, each skill, and make a kind of plan as you advance. Because there are multiple skills, but it isn't practical to have everything. However, there are basic skills that help a lot in the long run. And this is something that you will have to do in every Etrian Odyssey. And believe me, spending points in something that doesn't help can be nerve-wracking because it takes a while to increase a level. Therefore, it is important to discern between skills, and I know this can be a bit annoying as you want to play, but for example, before playing Etrian Odyssey 3, I spent a good 30-40 minutes checking every single skill and synergy between classes. In the long run, that saves a lot of problems. Another thing to keep in mind is that you cannot really rush these games if you're playing them for the first time, as there are random events that push you into boss battles or annoying encounters. In other words, it is always good to take it slow. Levels alone don't really help that much. You need to make decent equipment too, and that takes a bit of time, as sometimes you will have to fight several enemies or even FOEs, special monsters that can ruin your day in a couple of turns. On this front, it is always good to give them a try, once you have traversed multiple layers, but at first just run for your life, as oftentimes things will go sour. But later, once you can manage one of those battles, it is always good to beat them and try to get their materials, because in general they give decent items. With this idea in mind, it is always good to find how they drop the special items, as sometimes you need to bind them or beat them while in specific status ailments. Once you have a decent level and equipment, fighting the area bosses isn't as complicated, but then again, as you advance, try to come back and get every single item they drop, as oftentimes bosses give the best equipment. And that pretty much summarizes the whole deal with Etrian Odyssey. Now, I don't entirely recommend to get into the post-content once you have finished the main game. Before that, there are some challenges I suggest to tackle first, so you will have to complete multiple quests. And keep in mind which quest spawns which quest, because sometimes following a specific line of them is tricky as you advance, and they become important once you try to beat the secret bosses. And I cannot stress this enough, complete these challenges before diving into the post-content. This goes pretty much for every Etrian Odyssey, because if you have problems here, chances are that you're going to suffer a lot in the very last dungeon. In any case, it can be helpful to retire characters in the first games, as they will increase stats. So you are going to have better units, and at the end of the day, because of the number of enemies you will fight, levels will eventually come once again. Okay, so let's say you beat the secret bosses, retire your characters for extra stats and skill points. Now you're ready to suffer like a masochist. Into Claret Hollows we go. The main reason why plenty of people fail here, it's because most try to rush through this area with their most basic units, and it will not go well, as enemies down there are quite special, sometimes having but specific weaknesses, and brute forcing your way is a bad idea. Okay, if you got this point, I could say that the same idea could be extrapolated to every post-content. And if you ask me, I don't know which is the worst one. The very first time you try one of these challenges, things start to go downhill. So, to put things into perspective, have you ever heard that people who have finished SMT Strange Journey oftentimes talk about Sector E with tears in their eyes? Well, Eridanos is a walk in the park compared to any post-content here. And yeah, I mean the DS release, where you weren't able to save as free as in the 3DS. In other words, preparation is key. Now, the order in which I recommend the following Etrian Odyssey doesn't mean that is the best to worst. I prefer to leave some for later for different reasons, but I'll explain them as we go. After the remakes, I recommend the 5th entry, Beyond the Myth, as it offers a cool journey. The general execution within the dungeon is rather unique, as well as the classes and units you can use, mainly because you have access to all of them since the beginning. Then, I will say the 3rd entry is the next interesting step, mainly because this is where you will see late units and another execution with subclasses. You don't necessarily need them, but they help a lot to patch things down the line. The main reason why I recommend it later is because there are different endings here, and that can be annoying for some, as you need to do things in a specific order. In other words, better check a guide if you wanna beat the real main boss. After this, I believe the 4th entry is quite unique, because you have to move around in something like an overworld, and it can be a bit confusing while reaching late areas, as there are multiple dungeons within each area. In a sense, the complexity here is quite entertaining, as some are connected in complex ways. Then again, you will see those approaches kinda late. Then I will say Nexus. I haven't finished this game, I am currently in the 2nd area, but I think about it in like a kind of a Smash Ultimate, so it is better if you have seen most classes and details like that in previous Etrian Odyssey entries. And at the very end, I will leave the DS ones, mainly because if you had issues in the first Etrians I recommended here, chances are that you won't get that far in the originals, as ailments were much more annoying. And if playing every other Etrian Odyssey game is a raw experience, this is like biting a fresh cow. With that in mind, I wouldn't avoid them, because it is always good to have perspective how this franchise began, and where it is right now. Before closing, for those who want to understand a bit more about this game, let's say that the main story and events explain some details like what happened here, what is the Yggdrasil, the link between the games, but some other interesting details are explained while you get quests or random conversations, because there you will read some interesting things that otherwise you don't get to hear. However, you will have to read a lot. Nonetheless, I believe it is worth understanding most of those things, as they can be linked in multiple ways. With this, I hope you found this video informative, and I hope you give these games a chance, they are worth the time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.